is recording, so whenever you guys want to go, shoot.
What's up, everybody? We're here at the Real Vision Podcast Studio with now Senator Bob Britto. I'd like to introduce the man to my left and my very famous friend, Rafael Villanova. So Senator Bob Britto was a Providence native, graduated from Stonehill College before going on to work in the private sector at companies like Michaels, Alex and Ani, and developing his own contracting firm. He's a project manager currently employed with Rhode Island Housing, overseeing green construction and affordable construction with that branch of Rhode Island Housing. He's also been a local representative in East Providence from 2015 to 2022, and currently serving as a state senator. So welcome to the show, Bob.
Oh, thank you for having me. Boy, that was very good, man.
He did his homework on
man,
it.
you did do your homework.
I try to do my homework, you know.
He really did his homework on it.
Before this, he's acting like what do I do? Where am I from? And what am I all about? Now he ran it all down to me. I don't even think you need me here.
I think we need to replace ChatGPT with Matt Patty.
My grandfather said it's better to be thought dumb than stand up and prove it, you know. So speaking of grandfathers and fathers, yesterday was Father's Day, and starting from the top with you, I mean, your dad, John Brito, as a basketball player, you hear that name all over the place, and now I'm meeting John Brito's son. So, I mean, what was it like to grow up with a guy like that? Tell us all a little bit about your dad. I mean, I know he's got a mural in Fox Point. He played for the Harlem Globetrotters, New York Yankees. Just a legend locally for what he did for the Cape Verdean community and the basketball community. So tell us what it was like to grow up with a guy like that as your father.
And the Fox Point community as a whole as well. So it's not just the Cape Verdean community, but the community as a whole, because he really loved and enjoyed where he grew up. You know, he grew up in Fox Point, born and raised in Fox Point, and he raised his family in Fox Point. His parents came to this country, which were my grandparents, came to this country in the early 1900s. They settled here. They were immigrants. We hear all the conversation now going on about immigrants, and that's what Fox Point was all about back then. A lot of immigrants during that point in time, and of course, him growing up during the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s, and up until about 3 years ago when he passed away. He passed away of COVID, unfortunately, when COVID was pretty much at its peak. But he had some medical issues at that point in time. But growing up with him, it was great, And I also had the great pleasure not only growing up with him because he coached me, number one. So he taught me about discipline. Number two, I had the pleasure of working with him at the Fox Point Boys and Girls Club. So, couple those two together, I mean, it was the experience of a lifetime for me.
You're still involved in Fox Point Boys and Girls Club, if I recall correctly, right?
In an indirect manner. So I'm involved with the Fox Point Alumni Association. The Fox Point Alumni Association, or Fox Point Boys and Girls Club Alumni Association, is the oldest Boys and Girls Club Alumni Association in the country. And essentially what we do is we subsidize programs for the kids. So if the club is going on a trip or whatever it may be to see a show, we provide the funding for that show. So we have our own fundraisers. We take them for that money. We're a 501c3 organization. We meet once a month with the exception of the summertime. We also provide scholarships as well for those kids who attend the Boys and Girls Club, Fox Point Boys and Girls Club. But we subsidize their program, and we subsidize the whole nature behind subsidizing the programs, because when those older gentlemen who initiated the Alumni Association, there were times when they just couldn't pay for anything. And one of the things they always said was that we're going to make sure that these kids don't experience the same things that we went through when we were kids, because they grew up during the Depression.
Right.
So when they initiated the Alumni Association, it was the Fox Point Boys Club at that time, Alumni Association, and then back sometime, well, the Boys and Girls Clubs of Providence changed over to Boys and Girls Club sometimes in the mid-'70s. And then the Alumni Association at some point in time immediately followed to change their name from Fox Point Boys Club Alumni Association to Fox Point Boys and Girls Club Alumni Association. When that, getting back to what I was saying, but they wanted to establish that organization to make sure that every kid or no kid was left behind. And they started the No Left Behind thing before the Bush did.
Right.
Believe it or not. So
that came from the Boys and Girls Club in Fox Point.
Yes.
That set the record straight. And I think that there's something about my grandmother recently passed away, and she was a Great Depression person too. Like she grew up, that was her childhood. Something about that period that formed people differently, like the resourcefulness, that like community spirit, that like then came the like those people would have been young adults during Kennedy, right? Like, that's not what you can do, but what you can do for that's not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, right? And so I think there was something different about those people, like your father and like my grandma. I mean, did it put pressure on you growing up to have a dad who's, your dad's a legend, right? Like I've known your dad's name for years and years and years from just seeing him in gyms. I've been playing in gyms in the West End and in Fox Point and all around Providence, and you hear that name. I mean, you've obviously accomplished a lot in following his footsteps. Do you feel like it put pressure on you, or how did you respond to that growing up?
No, it didn't, because it wasn't about comparison. It wasn't about what my father did, and therefore I need to accomplish that. Or more importantly, he put that pressure on me to accomplish the things that he did, or the things that he didn't do, but he wanted his son to do. It was something, basketball was a game that I loved, first and foremost. And by the way, I didn't only play basketball, but it was a game that I really loved. It was a game that I really enjoyed. And what he did, for the most part, it wasn't only for those kids that were in Fox Point, it was those kids on the east side of Providence as well. And his way of thinking was that if I keep them actively involved in programs, kids that is, that keeps them off the streets and that keeps them out of trouble for the most part, or out of somebody's house, being in, or whatever it may be. So his way of thinking was, let me have these basketball leagues starting from 5 years old all the way up to 18 years old. And as long as I have those kids in a program, and then I'm keeping those kids off the street. And that was his thought. Right. So hence I come along with the kids that I grew up with, and they were all kids essentially that I grew up with. And then there was those kids who came from the east side. It was all about keeping us off the streets, keeping us out of trouble, and, working with us. I mean, we played 1 year, I can honestly tell you, and my friends could attest to this, and I might even have the scorebook to attest to this as well, that 1 year we played an NBA schedule. We played over 90 games.
That's wild.
That's 1 year. Yeah. We were playing nights, the daytime. Double headers. When you play school vacation, boom, you're in tournaments.
Right.
Weekends, you're in leagues. Different leagues during the course of the week. You might play in one league in Pawtucket a Thursday night, and another league in Providence on a Tuesday night.
Right.
In addition to that, you're playing to leagues or tournaments on weekends as well, and you're going to various places, not only in the state of Rhode Island, but Massachusetts as well.
That was back when our old legs could take like 3, 4, 5 games in a week.
Can you do that now? Can you do that now?
The thing about now is, and Matt, we were talking about this earlier, is how we determine how well we played the morning after is how good we feel about ourselves, or more importantly, how much pain we're in.
My body always feels terrible, but but I feel like a champion if I scored 20 points and we won, So
So then you take the next 2 months off.
Right. Because you don't want to mess up your track record at that point.
So now, after you were done in, Fox Point, when did you find the calling to be in the community? Because I know you've, like our friend Matt Patty here said, went to Stonehill. What prompted you to get more involved in the community?
My father. So let's fast forward a bit. Now, I'm older. I play high school basketball. I go into college. I attended Stonehill College in northeastern Massachusetts. I played ball there. I would get a job immediately following upon graduation of Stonehill College. And, at that time, I moved to Massachusetts, but I'm coming back and forth periodically to Rhode Island because my family, my friends, and everybody's back in Providence. So got to stop by and see everybody there. And this only was, 35, 45-minute ride from where I was living in Whitman, Massachusetts, to here in Providence. So I'm coming back and, always stop by. Everybody always stopped by. All the kids who got older and moved on, they always stopped by to see my father. Hey, Johnny, poke their head in the club. How's it going? Talk to him. So I would always do that. And then there came a point in time where there were kids, and I remember it distinctly like it was yesterday, where kids actually, he would tell me, like certain kids who didn't have, turkeys or meals for Thanksgiving. So I started, donating turkeys to them, And that kind of initiated my desire to get back into the community. Although I wasn't physically there, mentally it was always in the back of my head, and every time I came home. So with that being said, I essentially, Thanksgiving, then, Christmas comes along. You're trying to help out with the Alumni Association, although you're involved indirectly. You're not involved directly because I didn't live in I lived in Massachusetts, not Rhode Island. So, slowly but surely, kind of, and then an opportunity came where the directorship came up, and I decided to apply. My father, of course, wanted me to apply for the director's position. I applied, got the job, and then it was just at that point in time, because my father was embedded in the community, not only Fox Point, but every community throughout the city of Providence and beyond those boundary lines as well. But it was just, you're just constantly in the community helping people out, and that satisfaction, that personal satisfaction that you get out of being in a community, you're in the trenches with the people, you're helping them out, it doesn't get any better than that.
So it was grassroots for you. I mean, I guess on the timeline, we can jump around a little bit because it made me think about, I wanted to ask you about some of the consumer rights bills and the things that you've sponsored during your time with government, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I did a little bit of research, and I know that you did it basically having to do with grocery stores and how things are disclosed in grocery stores and how the self-checkouts are handled and the progression toward that. Fill me in on that work, because it kind of strikes me with what you were saying, that your motivation seems to be seeing how your father was as a man, being a person who took that learning and wanted to apply it, not necessarily but to the grassroots, right? To the people in the neighborhood, and how do you help them? How do you help the grandparents?
How did it come back to
that?
What made you want to have more of the humanistic side of, instead of the
so now we're going into
self-checkout
policy.
Yeah,
We're heading into policy
Gotcha,
now.
gotcha.
So
Yeah.
so what we do as legislators, we write policy, essentially.
Yep.
Is what we do. We come up with laws. In an event that it passes the General Assembly, both the Senate and the House, and gets approved by the governor, and then it becomes law, essentially. The checkout bill was not mine, actually.
Okay.
It was Senate President Lawson's bill.
Okay.
I think it's personally, I think it's a good bill, first and foremost, about self checkouts, because essentially it allows companies to have, or retailers to have, so many checkouts there. Because what it does is, when you have these self checkouts, it takes away jobs, it takes away opportunities for people to do their work, or work at cashiers. And for the most part, a lot of people, like when they go to a whatever type of store it may be going, Walmart, CVS, or otherwise, it's that personal contact that you have with the person behind the register, with the person behind the desk, for the most part. Me, I like being around people personally, so I enjoy talking to people. I go to checkouts and I don't go to the checkouts, but I enjoy that conversation of habit. And what that bill does is it prevents all stores essentially from having too many self-checkouts. But here's the important part of that bill. I worked at CVS prior to going over to Rhode Island Housing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that the board of directors of CVS said, not to me personally, but the department I was in, that's when they were really converting over to self-checkouts. So I was part of that initial, not so much, I don't want to use the word bill, but it was that initial sense of, we're going to start the first year, it's in a 5-year period, we're going to go from 300 and year one to about 10,000 self-checkouts. So just imagine that in all those stores where you used to go in and you have that conversation or that exchange with an individual behind a counter, and you no longer have that. So I was part of that team, not realizing what it does and how much effect that it does have on employment.
So
I noticed in the bill is sorry to interrupt you.
No. Go ahead.
I noticed in the bill it actually spoke about one thing that I hadn't contemplated as much, and I'm a big advocate for in our business in the real estate industry with Real Vision Properties here, is that you got to take care of the elderly, right? Like, we don't take a good enough care of our elderly. Like, we started out the conversation right after the day after Father's Day talking about your dad, who's a local legendary guy. And I think in the past there was a sense of community where it was implied that we would take care of the elderly, And now you see a lot of business practices that are actually designed, like in our business, there's people who put a black mark on the industry because they're specialized in trying to find old people so they can rip them off. They're called real estate wholesalers. That's just my opinion, not shared by Mr. Brito. But the truth of the matter is, I feel like we don't look out for the elderly enough. And part of what I read up on that bill was that the idea was that if somebody goes into the grocery store and they're 75 years old, 80 years old, 85, they're getting to be a senior citizen, whatever age it might be, and they have to go to some robot and check out, and they don't even have that option. And we're determining that people want it because corporations want it, because they feel like on a balance sheet it might save a few bucks or whatever, that's the person being disadvantaged. And that's what made me actually, as someone who's generally a little bit more of a libertarian, really interested in that kind of position, you know?
So think about the disconnect there.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, even the phone calls, the scams that phone calls that elderly get as well. You know, the warranties, you know, with people, your vehicle. I mean, my father got them a couple of times, and my father was actually, you know, thinking about sending money in, you know, before my brother or one of my siblings caught on to it, you know. But think about all the scams that are out there for the elderly more in particular.
It's atrocious,
and you're touching on that, you know. I mean, there's that disconnect right now where someone, you know, you take an elderly person who has no computer skills, no electronic skills whatsoever, and then you're introducing, you know, a checkout like, okay, what are the buttons I hit? How do I hit the buttons?
Right.
How do I end and continue and, you know, so forth? It just throws a monkey wrench into the whole plan, and it does a disservice to the elderly population.
So it's kind of like it brings you back to when you originally started, like you said, the turkeys. You know, your father saying, hey, you know, the kids, they're missing out on some Thanksgiving. Yeah. So you're basically now back to that level where you're helping out, not just the elderly, but you're also helping out.
But through policy this time.
With the kids now, where you're helping them as well, because now they're able to go into those checkouts and help out and be cashiers.
So I'll go back even further. So during my time at the Fox Point Boys and Girls Club, and we talked about being involved or being in the trenches with the people, working with the elderly as well. I also served on the Fox Point Senior Board at that point in time. So, you know, there's a combination of, you know, now you're talking about, you're going from one extreme to the next. You're going from 5-year-olds to 18-year-olds to actually senior citizens. Senior citizens during that time will come into the building. They do whatever, you know, was on the schedule or their agenda that they had, whether it's exercising, they go there for lunch. You know, they have their time where they're communicating with one another, arts and crafts, things of that nature as well.
Right.
And it's always good, you know, more importantly, I used to bring my daughter. My daughter was young at that point in time. One of the things she hated was preschool. You know, so I would take her out of preschool, you know, bring her to work with me.
Gotcha.
Elderly, and they absolutely loved her. You know, to this day, you know, they talk about her. Some of them who are still alive.
My daughters have always come to work. Actually, my daughter's upstairs now. Yeah, 2-year-old. So
I know that feeling all too well.
So I think that, you know, the common thing with those populations are it's the kids and it's the elderly. It's the people that don't have their own voice, that are not fully able to take care of themselves. Like I have this theory, right? Like if you assigned everybody a score, right? You said, okay, so somebody who only takes care of themselves, a guy who works, goes to work, makes enough money to pay his bills, doesn't really help anybody out, but doesn't drain the system or whatever. That's like a 1. It's like even money, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have somebody who has a huge impact, a guy like your dad or my grandma or somebody like that. They're going to be like a 4 or a 5 because they're doing the work of 4 or 5 people on a day-to-day basis, right? And then you have a lot of people who are going to be not quite measuring up to able to continue to contribute. Like if you make it into a math equation, right? And you have able-bodied males like us, we have a responsibility to carry more than just our own weight, right? Like we can't just go out and say, or able-bodied females too for every other, but once you get to be an adult and you're responsible and you have your intelligence and you have your health, it's like if you just say like, hey, I took care of myself today and I'm good. I ate, I slept, I made enough money to get by, whatever else. I don't feel like that's enough because there's so many people out there who are maybe getting to be elderly and they were a Spitfire when they were 50, 60, 70, and now they're getting up there. And just like there's kids, there's little babies, they can't take care of themselves. So I have this theory, like we actually have a responsibility to do more than just take care of ourselves once you reach a certain point in kind of like manhood, right?
By all means, and let's just take a look at it this way, you know, and you bring my father's name into this as well. My father was surrounded by his siblings,
right?
So we were very active in his life, you know, all the time we were very active in his life. So he had us. Right. In addition to that, he had nieces and nephews, but there are a lot of people who don't have that, you know, and the good thing about him is that support cast from the time he got sick to the time he was home to the time he got COVID, he always had a support cast around him. I gave you the example early on where warranty companies who took advantage of the elderly, you know, he always has someone there to cut it.
Right.
The scams that go on, it's got to be so tough. I mean, I almost fall for some of them, and I'm 43 years old. I send stuff I get from scammers to my accountant because it'll be like, you owe this fee or you're that fee, and like, you know, not to complain too much. Sometimes I don't know what the hell. Why am I supposed to pay this? Who's this guy FICO? Why do I have to pay him? Right. So like, I think Alan Funk said that when he was here. Actually, I'm stealing his material.
That's all right. I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
You know, I'll get something, I'll send it to my account, and they'll be like, that one's real. No, that one's not real. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that is one area where I think continued advocacy is important, especially in the digital realm and with where the scamming is going. And I think that I always advocate for anybody. I know, Rafael, you have you know a lot about the police, right?
Yeah.
I always am pushing for the idea that the next realm of crime is digital crime. It's scamming crime.
It's here.
It's here.
It's here.
And so how do we get our head around that and our hands around that without infringing on other people's liberties? It's always, and how do we moderate it when the people are in Nigeria and India and all these other places? It's a really interesting topic.
I mean, it's only going to get worse, only because AI is becoming more the generative use that people are going to. I mean, you know, I think just this week alone, or last week, Apple published a article on scholarly article, and they mentioned how like ChatGPT and Gemini and all those, they're really not up to par because a lot of people aren't feeding it the information where it needs to be, so that way it can continue to outsmart. So what they're doing is they're actually using it for the wrong purpose. So those text messages that you'll get that'll say, hey, you owe a ticket for Easy Pass, and the DMV is going to send out the fine for you. Start thinking about that's all AI generated now. That's all that stuff that's coming in.
And you're absolutely right about that, because I had I had two kids last year at University of Rhode Island, and my daughter would always go to Newport.
Gotcha.
So that's real, you know, getting that ticket, you know. In fact, I thought it was one day, and I sent it over to my wife. I said, hey, do you need to pay for this? She's like, that's a scam.
Right. You're about to. It looks very real.
It does. Yeah. And having kids at that time going back and forth from Narragansett to Newport, I can relate. I can understand.
And the last thing you want to do is not pay some $6 fine that you have, and now all of a sudden your license gets suspended, or what, you know.
Yeah. But you start looking at it. You know, there's details to it. I mean, obviously, you know, you look at it, and it's you know, they'll give you like the +663 area code.
Yeah.
Well, we're a country who uses, like, say, for instance, we're like the 1401.
Right.
You know, that's the key of looking at the scam. But like you said earlier, an elderly person is not going to see that and understand that.
And speaking of ChatGPT, I'm a big fan of using it sometimes. However, I will say that it got a couple things wrong. It said you built 2 projects you didn't build. It didn't talk about Medicom. It didn't bring that up. It said things you didn't do. It didn't say the things you did do. And so what else did she do?
It's not bulletproof.
It's not bulletproof, right?
So don't totally rely on it.
So now that you in the community, and you pound the pavement, and you build the grassroots for the community, what prompted you to run for your first time in office? What was your first position when you decided to say, what was that like, that decision making to say, so I'm going to run for council? And then
I'm all about economic development, good economic development. And when I ran initially was back in 2011. The state had already redistricted. So the District 63 on the House side became open. And I told my wife one day, you know what, I want to make a difference in my community. I'm going to run because I don't like the way the state is run. And what a coincidence. I don't like the way the state is handling their business by how long it takes permitting and things of that nature.
Love that.
To do work. So I said, I want to make a difference. And that's what I'm going to run on. And that's exactly what I ran on. Back in 2012, we had a 4-candidate race. I was predicted to come in 5th. I came in a close 2nd.
Wow.
And that ignited my desire to run even further. However, I haven't decided at that point in time where I was going to run, because fast forward a year and a half later, what ended up happening was that the council seat in the Ward 1 in the district that I live in, the district that we live in,
Yeah.
opened up. So
I remember that knock on the door.
So it was it was exactly
How you guys met her now?
Basically,
Yeah,
yeah.
pretty much.
You knocked on this door.
pretty
I say
much.
no kidding.
Well, I mean, we probably met along the way, but that's pretty much how we actually met.
because I love canvassing. I love knocking on doors. So what I did was I decided I was going to run. And my wife was, oh, who do you know? Now, again, let's go back to the conversation we had early on where I'm not from East Providence. I'm from Fox Point, you know? And I really didn't spend all my time and roots in East Providence as well, with the exception of my kids. They played Little League. They played football and things of that nature. They were involved with the local sports that they have, like most parents have their kids in. So I decided at that point in time, you know, I'm going to run. I ran. I came in a quick second. And I'm not one of those type of guys who said, you know, I'm going to talk about what other people were doing, because we never know, you know, how difficult or how, more importantly, how easy it is what somebody else is doing. So we always say, oh, that you should. If I was there, I would have did this or I would have done that. I'm not a sideline talker.
Right.
I'm going to get into the game and I'm going to play. Getting back to sports, and I got in, I lost, and I pretty much wiped my hands of it. You know, I lost. Now, however, people were calling me up, and they were telling me, good job, you did a good job. And I was like, good job in what?
Yeah.
And he said, you know, I lost. No, but your numbers, how close they were. I said, to me, there's two columns. There's a win column and there's a loss column.
If the other team hits
And
a
I
buzzer
lost.
beater, you
That's
lose.
sports, you lose.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter by
So,
how much you lose by,
right.
you just lose.
So now you go in, you dip your feet back in, you win the council seat. A few years later, you run for a re-election. You become council president. What prompted you to look at, because you had mentioned, you touched on it, permits? Because people in the state seem to have issues when they go in because government dictates, you know, you have to go to this one, you have to get this notarized, you have to get this stamped, go to this department, go to that department. What prompted you to make that change as quickly and make that so efficiently to happen?
So let's rewind this conversation to Station Fire. After Station Fire, everything became so difficult, and it became so hard to get permitting in this state. So that alone was just, and I worked as a project manager for a building company, and I pretty much did all the applying for permits at that point in time. And it's just relentless, the amount of times you got to go back and forth, not only to the building department, then you have to go over to the fire department from get the plans, you got to go over to the building department, a lot of back and forth. Did you get to see, review the plan? I mean, it was a nuisance. And it discouraged developers from not only coming into the city, but more importantly, it discouraged developers from coming into the state. We've since then, you see a lot of that drawback. We've released, we kind of made it a lot easier in the city of East Providence. Permitting, you could do that online now, whereas before it was never offered. You had to physically be there to get the permit and apply for the permit. Now it's so much, it's at your fingertips, like everything else is.
It's a huge topic for us. I'm so glad Rafael transitioned it to that, because obviously we want to use our platform here at our real estate company when we talk to somebody like you who's involved in the game on a much higher level than me. I am one of those guys who just complains a lot but doesn't do as much.
We should have a segment on that.
We should have,
just complain.
So we really feel like there are, and for me there are towns, and I know a lot of them, where you mentioned one where getting a fire permit to do anything is like, you know, is like the equivalent of like going to a court in Russia in 1935 or something like that. So basically, when we look at the permitting process, I feel like, and I said this last time we spoke with Mr. Alan Fung, we really feel like the politicians have actually started to really kind of understand the situation at hand, get it right, try to present options for ADUs, try to streamline zoning, like we're in a housing crisis. And then sometimes you kick it back to some of the building officials who are like, not in my town, buddy, you know? And so I think that I love hearing from people in your shoes, because in our shoes, sitting back as lay people, we always kind of try to compare the public and the private sector, and it's difficult to do, right? It's very difficult to make that comparison.
To piggyback on that, I mean, what do you see Rhode Island in the future for real estate? Do you see it because of, you know, the fingertip process? We talked about computing, the age of skills and stuff like that. Where do you see Rhode Island changing some of those and seeing it more openly so that people can start, building, selling homes. We know that there's a lot of transplants coming from Mass, Connecticut, New York. I mean, Rhode Island's probably like the stop where everybody wants to come. But you sitting in the state house level, you sat in the councilman level. Where do you see real estate in the future for Rhode Island?
Well, I'm not a real estate broker. I'm not a real estate analysis. I could tell you from a business perspective of doing business in the state of Rhode Island, for an example, for me, I could see how much easier. We're not quite there. We're actually on our way there, where it's becoming so convenient that if you're a developer from out of state or wherever it may be, that you don't have to be in the state to apply for those applications for the permanent process, number one. Take, for an example, in the city of East Providence, how difficult it was before and how easy it is today. Having planning board directors, working with them specifically to make it so convenient for developers and others to come into a municipality, whether it's in housing or whether it's in business or whatever it may be, that it should be so convenient and not discouraging for people to come in, or companies to come in and do business in that municipality. And we're seeing that more and more in East Providence, and that was one of the things that I worked on in the city of East Providence, to make it conducive for those developers. And look what's happening now. Look at the housing and how it's exploding in the city of East Providence. Right. All the apartments that are going up, first and foremost. Look at, you got Live Nation. Look at all the businesses that we have there as well.
Right.
So we got a waterfront. We got gem in the city, the waterfront property that we have there. So that explosion, although it's not quite to where we would like to see it, the way I like to say, it's on its way.
Rhode Island is a hot market right now. I mean, we have an amazing opportunity to grow in this state. I mean, I've always felt like the smallness of our state could be the advantage because you have so much diversity in such a small area, diversity of people, diversity of landscape, diversity of, of everything, And so when I look at that, I feel like that's the last piece that's really being kind of put into place, is making this a business-friendly, development-friendly place that still honors the traditions and honors the people and honors the individual history of the state. So I want to thank you for your participation and for your words on this today, because for people watching the podcast here at Real Vision Properties, powered by Real Broker LLC, we really want to speak with people who are in positions like Mr. Brito, Senator Brito, who took some time out of Robert Brito. What do you call it?
One thing I like to
Uncle
say
Blue. Uncle Blue, is that what you say? Uncle Blue.
Now, one thing I like to always say is that who I was before is who I am now.
Right.
So the title doesn't change the individual. So I like to always say, when people say senator or council president, councilman, whatever it may be that they call, and they call me other things as well. Right. But I do say, Robert, Bob, Bobby, Brito. Some people even call me by my last name. So by no means, I always tell people to call me Robert, Bob, Bobby, Brito, last name. So.
Well, Bob, I hope you are willing to come back and sit with us again.
I most certainly am, and I'm looking at the time right here, and I'm going to make it over at the State House in 4 minutes. Sir. What are the chances of that happening?
In 4 minutes?
You'll make it to nothing?
You're on Spanish time today.
No, Cape Verdean time.
Tiempo de Español. Tiempo de Español.
Cape Verdean time, it's somewhat similar to. So if you tell us a party like my in-laws, I don't know, I'm kind of going over the time right now.
That's all right. Well,
people can understand this anyway. The Cape Verdeans at least can understand this. So my wife is French Canadian.
Okay.
And they are very, they're on the money. You tell them, when my kids were young, you tell them a party starts at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, they're at my house at 10:30 in the morning, and I'm not even getting ready.
You're still setting up. You don't even know what to do.
I'm cleaning up. No, I'm not even setting up at that point. Yeah. That's too early to set up. However, when they're on their way out at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, because they've been there for 5 hours at this point in time, my family's coming in and saying, "Where you going? Why are you leaving so early?"
Cape Verdeans throw the best parties.
And then they don't want to leave.
I don't think it's Cape Verdeans. I think that's a whole general thing.
Bernardino Ramos, shout out to Bootsy, our ops director. He's Cape Verdean, and his wife's Armenian. And he says during the week he's Bernardino, and he's on time, and he's got his shirt pressed nice. On the weekend, he's got his Jordans, he's got his $250 sweatsuit, and he's bootsy, and that's when he can't be on time anymore. That's
how I
time.
feel right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
It's heading over to the State House.
Right.
So
Well, thanks
I wanna,
again.
Thank you.
listen, I want to thank you both for having me. It's a pleasure talking to you. Unfortunately, I mean, I just feel so comfortable in this setting, and I wish we had a little more time. But unfortunately, we don't. But it was a pleasure. All my pleasure, just talking to you about, whether it's politics, my personal life, my father. So always good to talk about my father because his life still lives on. But thank you both.
Absolute pleasure. And Rafael, thanks for bringing
All
this
right,
gentleman in.
Yeah. The famous
Rafael?
Rafael always
All
gets.
right.